LaCroix tastes like when you walk into a room and forgot what you went in there for.
Okay. You're live.
All right, everyone. Welcome to this Friday's Tech Talk. My name is Brett. I am officially the Dean of the Tech Academy, whatever that means. But I work here, and I've actually been here working with the Tech Academy since its inception, at least since it was branded the Tech Academy. So it's been a lot of fun. So we are going to talk about net neutrality today, and this is actually a fairly complicated subject, and I'm going to try to make it as non-complicated as possible. So I've got a few slides we're going to go through here, but first, I think I should probably go ahead and just try to define what net neutrality is. So to put it simply, and I should probably say first that net neutrality doesn't have the same definition for everyone. You'll kind of find out why as we go through the slides. But put simply, net neutrality is the idea that all data that comes through broadband services, through Comcast or whatever your internet provider might be, that all of that data should freely flow from the internet provider to the consumer. So the internet provider, as far as the idea of net neutrality is concerned, doesn't mess at all with the data. It just let it go right through to the consumer. So let's start with the slides here. So we've got net neutrality presenting both sides of the argument. We're going to start in 1934. I was thinking of starting a little earlier than this, but I think 1934 will suffice for the presentation. President Franklin Roosevelt approved the Communications Act. This act created one of the largest monopolies the world had ever seen. And I'll also throw in that AT&T had already been around for several decades. It held somewhat of a monopoly status. It had an agreement with the government, which basically granted it that status, but it wasn't considered a true monopoly, at least not yet. But this act is really what created the monopoly status for AT&T. So the monopoly, so the monopoly was the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, which came to employ over 1 million workers. In 1988, the Department of Commerce declared that the chief focus of the Communications Act of 1934 was on the regulation of telecommunications, not necessarily its maximum development and promotion. So the idea was that it would simply regulate AT&T, but at the same time, it was thought that AT&T had a natural monopoly, and that the government would go ahead and accept that natural monopoly and say, we accept that fact, but we're going to go ahead and regulate you. So they regulated them as the same way that they do electricity and other public works. In 1982, you'll see I have a AT&T logo here. It looks like the Death Star. I thought that looked cool, so I put that in. After a series of antitrust lawsuits or monopoly lawsuits, AT&T was forced to release control of its regional subsidiaries. These were called the Bell Operating Companies. Colloquially, AT&T was known as, well, for a long time was known as Ma Bell, and these Bell Operating Companies were known as Baby Bells. AT&T would now be known as a long-distance carrier, while the regional carriers would deal with local exchanges. So in other words, AT&T was now in charge of connecting towns and cities together, while these regional carriers would simply deal with local connections. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, had now largely released its hold on AT&T and forced it to compete in the open market. So the FCC now said AT&T is no longer going to have a monopoly status. We're not going to support that. We're going to force it to compete in the market and have other competitions spring up. So in 1995, well, really in the early 1900s, internet service providers began springing up. And in 1995, in addition to the national and international ISPs, there were thousands of regional ISPs. Of course, we don't see that today, but there were quite a few at the time. AT&T and the Baby Bells were now interested in providing internet services. In 1996, President Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, which replaced much of FDR's Communications Act. The idea was to do away with monopolistic provisions through deregulation, and thus creating an environment of competition. However, the FCC's regulatory activity nearly tripled compared to its previous activity. Two new categories came from this act. Number one, the telecommunications service. This was a provision in the act which basically stated that any company that was under, that was labeled as a telecommunications service was under the authority of the FCC. So the FCC had the authority to regulate those companies broadly, and then the other was information services. Now, if you were part of, if you were labeled as an information service, you weren't. You had some oversight, but for the most part, you could do what you wanted. The FCC wasn't going to really do much as far as regulation is concerned. In 2002, the FCC ruled that cable modem services will now be classified as information services. So if you remember on this slide, the information services did not have much oversight from the FCC. However, DSL was still considered a telecommunications service, so it did have stringent regulations put upon it, or remained, I should say. In 2003, Columbia Law School professor Tim Wu coined the term net neutrality in an essay that argues the need to prevent internet service providers from blocking or throttling, which means to narrow the bandwidth or stop bandwidth from coming through from particular online content. However, he did state that some management of bandwidth was necessary for satisfying customer experience. In 2004, FCC Chairman Michael Powell introduces what he calls 4 freedoms. Number 1, freedom to access content. Number 2, freedom to use applications. Number 3, freedom to attach personal devices. and for freedom to obtain service plan information. So these make up well, what's known as the foundation of net neutrality. 2005, the FCC adopts 4 freedoms, but oddly enough, the associated policies didn't establish, I guess it's a quote here, do not establish rules, nor are they enforceable documents. So, interestingly, they really couldn't even enforce these things. DSL on the same day was reclassified as an information service. So, again, if you remember, that means that they were not as stringently regulated. In 2007, Comcast found, there's an error here. It should be Comcast was found to be blocking BitTorrent upload traffic. The FCC declared that this was in violation of the 2005 net neutrality principles. Comcast was ordered to cease its BitTorrent blocking, but Comcast ended up challenging the FCC's decision, and the DC Court of Appeals ended up backing Comcast. I won't go into why that was the case, but that's what happened. In 2010, FCC Chairman Julius Genachowski proposes that the transmission of broadband service be reclassified as a telecommunications service, which would allow greater oversight to ISPs. However, after an extensive debate, the idea is replaced by simply creating a stronger set of regulations preventing ISPs from ever blocking and or throttling web traffic. Still, ISPs were able to charge content companies like Netflix, YouTube, etc., additional fees for priority access to their customers. So, so this was a big deal because this actually, this was official, or in other words, the ISPs now officially could not block any content. They couldn't throttle content, and so it wasn't just a statement. In 2015, after DC Circuit Court, that's definitely a mistake there. After the DC Circuit Court determines that the FCC should have more. You know, I don't think I wrote that right at all. But let me tell you in my own words what's happening here. So the DC Circuit Court determined that the FCC should have more authority to regulate broadband. And the FCC ruled that all broadband traffic will now be considered a telecommunications service. So this is extremely significant because telecommunication services, if you are labeled a telecommunication service, you are now considered a utility, which makes you a service for public consumption, and that gives the FCC a very broad array of regulatory policy that it can enforce upon these upon broadband, I should say. So that was a pretty big deal. This was and then this basically amounted to what we think of today as the net neutrality rule. So when this was passed, it was said that net neutrality has passed, and you know, for the proponents of net neutrality, they say we've got what we wanted. So in 2017, the FCC actually repealed the previous FCC decision, and they did so by a 3-2 vote. This was also a significant when it came out. There were a lot of people that weren't happy about this, and and so today we basically the ISPs, internet service providers, are not under regulations of FCC, at least for the most part. So the question is, are you for or against net neutrality? So let me give you, and I'm going to try to be as unbiased as I can, but let me give you an argument for both sides, and I should also mention that there's actually not just two sides of this. It gets pretty complicated. If you remember here, there were originally policies that the FCC passed that disallowed ISPs from blocking content or throttling content. But ultimately, in 2015, it wasn't just those net neutrality rules that passed. It was that the ISPs now were part of public consumption. They were labeled as utilities. So this almost, for a lot of people, almost went too far. So what do we call net neutrality? Was it just those original principles, or does net neutrality also mean also have to do with ISPs being utilities? So so it's not exactly black and white there. But let me give you an example of just a couple of differing opinions here. Again, there are quite a few opinions. There are not just two sides of this, but for sake of simplicity, I'll do my best to give both of the major sides of the debate. So first, we'll start with those that are against neutrality. So someone that was against neutrality would say that they would say, obviously, an internet service provider has nothing to do with what comes through or what comes to me. The service provider should simply open up their tubes, their pipes, the wires. That's what they seem to say these days. But so it comes through, and I just get what I want. If I go to if I request a page for Google.com, they shouldn't slow it down. They shouldn't block it. It doesn't matter what kind of web traffic it is. It doesn't matter what I'm requesting, unless it's something that's illegal. And they would also say it doesn't make any sense that that internet service providers should have to try to get, and I think I missed stating this, but ISPs also will. One thing that was that a lot of people were upset about was that they were looking to try to charge other companies like Netflix, extra fees for priority or bandwidth priority, and so people that are against net neutrality say this is just horrible, horrendous, because the consumers, for one, are already paying for the bandwidth. That's what they pay you for. So we should just get what we want, and then the content providers are also paying you, and so they should, so the content that they have available and they deliver should also just run freely through the wires. So so that is the case against, I think I said against at the beginning, didn't I? Whoops. That was all for net neutrality. I'm sorry. That was all for net neutrality. So so the argument against net neutrality goes something like this. that yes, the uh, it's true that the consumers are paying us ISPs, and it's true that the content uh, uh, deliverers are paying us as well. But there's something that that people aren't seeing, and it's this: that we're at the point, um, we've come to the point where there is so much traffic that um, that there's just not enough to go around. Sure, people can choose, the types of speeds they want, which is great. So you pay a higher amount to get, greater bandwidth. Um, and on the other side, they say it's also great that content providers, um, pay us for what they're, you know, for allowing their content to run through the wires. But the thing is, if we allow, for example, Netflix that owns, they say like 30, well, they make up about 30 or 40% of all the traffic now, or the bandwidth. They say, well, if they're going to come in and single-handedly, like just take over or cause so much traffic, they're going to need to pay extra because what's happening is when so many consumers are streaming Netflix, there are all of these other people that say, "Well, that's not fair because I'm necessarily now subsidizing all of these Netflix users because I don't even use Netflix. Maybe you're a grandma and you're emailing. You just email once your grandkids. I don't know, whatever you might do if you're a grandma. But but um, and so it doesn't matter what speed or what plan you have. It's still going to slow you down. Um, and so um, And so the ISPs would say, so we need to, so we've created a business model here um, um, where we charge extra because bandwidth is a scarce resource that there's just not an infinite amount of, and we have to do something. If we with the less and less bandwidth being available, we have to either charge our customers more, or we could simply charge the companies that are causing the buildup of traffic. So they say we should be able to charge Netflix, for example, and then and then and then Netflix could they might have to raise their prices. And then some Netflix users would say, okay, well, maybe I don't want it bad enough, so I'll stop. So that kind of slows down the bandwidth a bit. Um, and then yeah, so that's basically it. So with that being said, I would like to ask you: are you for or against net neutrality? Does anyone have an opinion? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll take a position of supporting net neutrality because it's helping the average or the person who wants to post their information, their website, and it's helping the little person, man or woman who wants to post that information, as opposed to the large corporations with tons of money who can just fast track their data to load faster, appear more prominently, manipulate what the internet that we see that we access. So certainly, helping the smaller businesses, maintaining their revenue stream or whatever, or their content, their market. I would be
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm against
Mhm.
So basically, I'm against neutrality, but I think the government should put out a company model is using for the service. However, I think these big companies are created or were created by regulation. So I'm for a lot of, as you said, there were like thousands of internet service providers before, but now we don't have that. So I would love to see thousands of internet service providers per region or even city, where the user can choose from who is he going to get his data from. It's a little bit interesting question because we have one wire coming from ISPs. So how are we going to solve this? Maybe 5G will make this happen in some internet service provider network that servicing and if the consumer can choose between service providers freely, then I can choose to regulate what kind of traffic I'm putting on what property, and the consumer can switch to another.
There are other, of course, you know, there aren't a whole lot, but there are other regional ISPs. We don't, you know, we're really not that familiar with them, but they are out there, and they are actually they're actually against net neutrality. It says that it stops them, it holds them back from entering the market, at least the large majority. So that I think that's an interesting point as well. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Like it seems like the ISPs have kind of like a monopoly. But about in 1,000 regions, there's only two or even just a single ISP to choose from.
Yep.
Giving them all the power to limit your movement, that's basically it. It's stuck with that one person. So say you want a different package, either you pay so much more extra for that package, or you don't even have a choice. So that seems like it's very restrictive on the customer.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
There's more fundamental issue. Like we use the analogy of say like electricity. A power station generates electricity, but then there's distribution of electricity. So in that sense, the content would be, they generate content. But if you had a better distribution network, then the for or against could actually be normalized. Because if you're putting a T1 line in, then you're eliminating the brand bandwidth.
Yeah.
So yeah, there needs to be, as long as it's not illegal content, which of course is regulated. Otherwise, you should be allowed choice of about which ISP. But it does come down to the distribution. It's getting more lines in, faster lines. That makes a lot of sense. Then I don't think that it should be like for or against at that point.
Yeah, if we did have, and if that does happen, where it becomes a,
Maybe with 5G.
yeah, if that happens and we start making higher speeds available to everyone, then this could be a moot point or discussion. So so hopefully that happens and we don't have to deal with net neutrality. But yeah, other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess, in my opinion, I kind of agree with what you all said, especially in the coming days when access to the internet is more and more important. I mean, like a decade or two, access to the internet could be crucial just to be able to function in society. It seems like access to the internet should be a public utility, like electricity is.
Okay.
I mean, like, probably better functioning government. It's like,
Well, that would help too. Yeah, that would.
but I mean, in
That would
an
definitely
ideal
help.
world, I think access to the internet would be a public utility.
Okay. Thank you. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, in that sense, it's like if we don't have that neutrality, it's like electricity providers say that, oh, we're not gonna give you this type of energy because you are using too much energy for the fridge. So it's nonsense. It's like, okay, you are giving me electricity, let me use, let me decide how I'm going to use that electricity. So in that sense, net neutrality is like, yeah, I want to buy a damn thing. Don't tell me that.
Yeah, there's definitely trade-offs there. Okay, other comments? Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
What about like the commercial? So like, say I have like I own an ISP and I have like I'm also releasing a new product, but similar competitors are also releasing that product online. For example, kind of play, but I have a vested interest. So wouldn't that kind of open the door to me saying, oh, people who I'm providing for are not going to like be able to access at slow speeds that competitors' product, so that sell more of mine. And say like companies start pairing up like that, and suddenly like say Apple pairs up with someone, and then they're like, it just opens the doors like, oh, Samsung has released. No, we're not gonna let them. Like, why not just slow them down so that customers are more likely to postpone their purchase?
Okay.
So that seems like it opens the door a bit more to that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. And there was anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
So it also seems like there's like these companies are determining like preferential content, but censorship. I feel like there's all right, so Netflix takes up a swath of this, but what if there's some alternative to Netflix? Blockbuster is still doing things. For Blockbuster, Netflix, do we follow that Netflix to go to Blockbuster? So that's where that preferential aspect comes in, which can lead to censorship.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Well, I think we'll go ahead and stop there. I don't want to, I don't want to, really give, my stance on it. I think it'd be better left up, just stay. Yeah, that's right. So we'll let everyone make up their minds on it. But this is good. It didn't sound like a comment section of YouTube, and that's what I wanted. That's what I was hoping for. So thank you guys, and hopefully we learned a little bit more and a little bit more informed. Thanks a lot, and I'll let everyone get back to doing what they're, getting back to their day. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. You got it?